What is sci-fi, and what does it mean to the two of you?
Huh. Wow, that's an interesting question. That's a big question. Well, should I take it, Elaine? Because I'm the science fiction geek. Science fiction, it's a wonderful playground because it allows us to comment on our world, but in a way that makes it much more universal. For instance, when Rod Serling came up with Twilight Zone, he was censored by the networks and the sponsors in terms of saying anything he wanted to say about politics or race or social issues of the day. So he created Twilight Zone so he could comment on those things without the censors removing it. And as a result, those Twilight Zone episodes are as timely now in the Trump era as they ever were when he was writing and Eisenhower was president or Kennedy was president. So I love the fact that science fiction allows me to reach an audience of millions of people around the world, and the work lasts decades and actually centuries ultimately.
And it also seems to inspire people because there are so many things that were jumped off from things like Star Trek, where geek kids grew up to be geek scientists, and they actually jumped in and they made it real. So it really is inspirational. And one thing that I really like about science fiction is it's the same thing with stories in small towns or westerns. It's where a lot of the complexity of modern life is stripped away, and we can really focus on moral and emotional issues in a much clearer way.
Yes, yeah. And also, if you kill a character, you can bring them back because you can clone them or whatever.
I'm particularly good at that, yes.
Have their head in a tank with nutrients or whatever. It's really fun.
Do you remember the first time the two of you were exposed to the first sort of sci-fi story and where you were, how old you were in life?
Well, between the two of us, I'm the real science fiction geek. I mean, Elaine was reading Dostoevsky when she was a kid and Tolstoy.
But I wanted a robot.
You wanted a robot toy, yeah, exactly. But my first experience with science fiction, when I was a kid, I was reading comic books from as early as I can remember. My first favorite book was Farmer in the Sky by Robert Heinlein when I was 7. I just grew up in the genres. Twilight Zone, Star Trek, Outer Limits, those are the 3 shows that made me want to be a writer. And as soon as I was a teenager, I started going to science fiction conventions and meeting those writers, the writers who'd written for those shows, Harlan Ellison, D.C. Fontana, David Gerrold, Theodore Sturgeon, Richard Matheson, George Clayton Johnson, Ray Bradbury, and many of them became friends and mentors. And so I definitely knew where home was for me.
And I was more brought up on the social issues than some of the older writers, like 1984 and H.G. Wells, where they were really exploring social issues. So rather than the newer writers, I knew the older ones, and my parents leaned strongly to the left, and so did I. And so we found their ability to explore things where people would not put up walls because it was in the future, allow them a much greater freedom to reach into people's thought processes and feelings without defensiveness.
So that's sort of some of it. I just was, when I was a kid, I was given a Christmas present of a trip to the Star Trek set. So I was there for the last episode of the original Star Trek ever shot, Turnabout Intruder. So I got to sit in the captain's chair and stand on the transporter. I remember looking up and seeing there was just a light bulb screwed into the transporter above my head, and I thought, well, gee. And I remember thinking how small, the engineering on the Star Trek set was a forced perspective, and I was thinking, gee, this is a lot smaller than it looks on television. And it was just an amazing day, really a wonderful, wonderful day, the best Christmas present ever.
Elaine, do you remember the first time you heard about Space Command?
Oh my God!
No.
No, I don't. It seems to have been
it's
ubiquitous.
It's the hell you wandered into.
It's ubiquitous. He seems to have been talking about it like forever, you know. But I actually don't remember. When did you first hit me up with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of. Well, it's funny because with Space Command. It evolved over a period of time. It was basically, as I said, Star Trek was really the formative moment in my life. When Star Trek debuted, the first episode was The Man Trap. It aired when I think Star Trek debuted when I was 10 years old, and it was the thing I'd been waiting all my life for. It really brought everything together, And I think from the moment that I read The Making of Star Trek when I was 13, I decided I wanted to be a showrunner. I wanted to create and run my own science fiction show. And all the hundreds of hours of television I did, all the books I wrote, were all toward learning that, gaining those skills that I would need to be able to do that thing. And when Elaine and I got together, I mean, we've been together for 40 years, we've been married for 39. She was a terrific director. She'd already been a director off Broadway. She'd already been an actress. She was a wonderful writer. And so on some projects we would collaborate, on other projects we would work individually over the years, but clearly with Space Command it was obvious that I would need her skill set, and we both love working with actors, we love working with editors, and I love visual effects artists, I love concept designers and so forth. So I'd been gathering a team, and so from the beginning I knew I wanted to work with Elaine on this project.
But the key jumping off point was we were both feeling very disturbed about the dark and cynical turn that science fiction had taken.
Yes.
And he introduced me, well, I guess I knew a little bit about it before, but he was a great fan of things like Space Patrol. And it was where, you know, bad things happened, but good people were good people.
Well, just to jump in for a second,
yes.
Space Patrol was a science fiction show that aired live in the 1950s, and I didn't grow up watching it, but in the 1980s, USA Cable had a show called Night Flight, and they ran kinescopes of that show. The kinescopes were filmed. Basically, you put a camera, a 16mm camera, on a high-resolution TV screen as the show was broadcast live, and you'd record it on film. And those were called kinescopes. And so they were airing those kinescopes of Space Command, and it was a wonderful show. It came before Star Trek, but it had a great sense of adventure. And later I met the star of the show, Ed Kemmer, who had actually been a pilot in World War II. He flew a P-51 Mustang. He'd been shot down. He was captured by the Germans, escaped from a German POW camp. He was a real hero before he played a science fiction hero in the 1950s.
And he looked like one. He seemed like one.
Very handsome man.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the inspiration, and then of course Star Trek. And when Elaine was talking about the dark science fiction, there was a period a few years ago where all the science fiction was very dark and very dystopic, whether it was Battlestar Galactica, which I very much liked, or Elysium, or After Earth, or any of these things. They all were saying the future is going to be really bad and there's not anything you can do about it.
And most people are mean-spirited and things don't work out well.
Right.
And what was odd, or what Marc pointed out what was odd, was that this was being written by writers whose lives was pretty darn good.
Yeah,
you know?
they go home to their families and they live in Pacific Palisades and they have a very nice life. They're paid hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars.
Sure.
So somehow there was a disconnect between the life they were creating personally and the work they were writing. And I felt very strongly that science fiction, Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, Star Trek, those shows had a moral compass. And particularly Star Trek said, the future is going to have challenges. Star Trek was shot during the Civil Rights Movement, during the Vietnam War, and yet it said the future is going to have challenges, but we can reach across boundaries and barriers and come together to create something better. And I thought that was very important to say now.
And some of it is not just about science fiction, it's the objective of storytelling. I mean, if we assume that most people have kind of a hard life, I mean, somebody in their family is mentally ill, somebody is on substances, and they're struggling, you work hard, and you go and you watch a story, and it says, well, things are really dark and awful, and you don't have any hope, and it's all going to go to hell. And you say, well, is that really a responsible stand to take, or do you want your audience to go out of there and saying, okay, it's a struggle, but people can come out on top. People are basically good at heart if you just give them a shot, and you give people a sense when they leave that theater that there's possibility. It just seems far more accurate and socially responsible, and to just put them on a downer.
Well, you know, we work in an extremely powerful medium. You know, television reaches millions of people around the world. If you do it right, it lasts forever. Most of the shows I've written for are still being watched, even the ones that I wrote when I was in my early 20s. And so there's a question that many writers never ask themselves, which is, as far as I can tell, which is, am I actually creating something that's making the world a better place? Am I actually sending out a message that I would want people to take to heart? You know, TV can do one of three things. It can either anesthetize, or fill people with despair, or inspire people. And I think the first obligation of any dramatic entertainment is to entertain, obviously. If you don't entertain, it doesn't matter what your message is, people won't stick around for it. But beyond that, once you entertain people, once you bring them into your world, and they love that world and want to be part of that world, then if you can say, well, take these lessons, take what you've seen in the story, take it out into the real world, take it out into your life, you can actually have a better life, you can make a better world. I think those are very important messages to communicate.
Not airy-fairy, you know, like not sugarcoat anything, because people don't like to be lied to, and they know when they're being lied to, like, oh, everybody's happy, everybody's, you know. Right. But if you, within a real context where you say, okay, things are hard, you get into a bad mood, you say the wrong thing, but you can be man enough to apologize, you know, those are the kinds of things you like to address.
Yeah, yeah.
Marc, when you were first creating Space Command, was it in your mind that you were going to attempt to sell it to a studio?
It's very interesting. You know, when I started in television, I've been a professional writer since I was 19. I sold, well, actually, in truth, my first radio play aired when I was 18 on KPFK. My first short story I sold when I was 19. I started writing my first book when I was 22, The Twilight Zone Companion, and I was writing for television by the time I was 22 or 23. And when I started in television, if you wanted your work to reach millions of people, it had to be through a studio and a network. And there were only 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and also PBS, you know, public television. And that was it. And so now, and also you had to shoot on 35 millimeter or 16, and you edited on a moviola, and it cost millions of dollars to make any television program per episode. Now, of course, it's very, very different. You can shoot on a digital camera. We own a Red, and you edit on a laptop. Our editor is back at our place right now editing Space Command on our laptop, and it's hooked up to our big screen TV. And you can reach out to your audience. Your audience can help finance what you're doing, and you can also reach millions of people via the internet. So, you know, a lot of people stay stuck in the way things used to be, and I think that's a big mistake. I embrace the new model, and I love the new model, and I love the direct communication with my audience. I feel that I'm the same as my audience, and so if I like something, if I'm enthusiastic about something, I know my audience will be too. And so with Space Command, initially my idea was, it's funny, when I first came up with the idea of doing a hopeful vision of the future, it's this multi-generational saga that covers 150 years in the future. It takes place in the solar system and beyond. And a lot of my friends run network shows. And a number of them said to me, well, you know, listen, we can team up and we can walk this into a network and get a pilot deal. But I knew from experience that if I sold it, and it probably would sell, I'd be hired to write the script, and then the network could cut it off its script, and then they would own it. No one would ever see it. Or they could greenlight it to production of the pilot, and then we'd shoot the pilot, and if they didn't greenlight it to series, again, no one would ever see it. Or if they greenlit it to series, they might have notes that would screw it up and ruin it. So I thought, well, no, let me see if I can raise money. I'd never raised money before, but I said, let's see if I can reach out to the audience. I mentor thousands of young people in Hollywood, well, actually people of all ages, via the Roundtable I run and the classes I teach, and I'd been hearing about crowdfunding, and so I thought, well, let's see if I could do that. So our target was $75,000 to raise in 2 months. We hit that in 3 days, and we kept going, and we raised $221,000. And then I sold investment shares to my backers and raised another $500,000. And we're still going strong. And so that was enough to open our own studio, shoot the first 2 hours of Space Command, shoot 30 minutes of the second 2 hours. I've written the first 8 hours and outlined hours 9 through 12, so that's a season. So then the question is, well, do I want to take it to a network? Is there a reason to take it to a network if you've gotten this much of a head of steam? There are over 500 scripted comedies and dramas on all the various networks and platforms now, 500 series. The cost of rolling out a show, promoting it, just so people know it exists, is $23 million. I can raise enough money to make Space Command. I can't raise enough money to promote Space Command. So that's where a studio and a network, or more ideally, more specifically a network or big platform like Netflix or Amazon, makes sense. Because if I really want to reach a world audience on a broad scale, if I want this to really last and reach the people I want to reach, that makes a lot of sense.
And the fact of the matter is that he started out wondering if it would be a single film. And what happened was, once we started with the crowdfunding, something that we hadn't seen as an aspect of crowdfunding wasn't just gathering money to shoot something, but it was gathering awareness worldwide.
Yes.
And that awareness through us, because we're both self-funding people, and we said, maybe a few other people are really down on this dark trend and will want to see something that's hopeful vision of the future. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the outpouring was so great, that's what ignited this crazy ambition in this mad person. And it started to grow and grow and grow. And he said, well, maybe 2, maybe 3. And so although it started as a single, it became a much larger story.
Right.
And became, well, how about ongoingly? And we've had investors just walk up to him and say, I invested in this because I wanted to see something that gave me hope.
Yes.
Specifically.
Yeah.
And so we realized that something that was troubling to us was profoundly troubling to vast numbers all across the globe.
Well, it's funny because during our Space Command campaign, I got a phone call, and it turns out that there's a real Space Command. It's the space-going arm of the United States Air Force. And they called me, a major in the Air Force called me, and I thought, oh gosh, they're either going to want to shut me down or have me change the name. And I got on the phone with Major Glenn Roberts of the U.S. Air Force. He says, we love what you're doing. We want to be part of it. Great. But the funny part is, during our campaign, if you typed Space Command into Google, we came in first and the Air Force came in second. And even to this day, if you type in Space Command, the Air Force comes in first and we come in second even still. So millions of people around the world know about Space Command. Thousands gave us money, and which is very, very heartening. But yes, as Elaine was saying, originally it was going to be 1 2-hour story, and I actually wrote half of it before the campaign and then immediately sat down afterwards and wrote the second half of that 2-hour script. But because I was doing media interviews every single day of the campaign, as I talked about Space Command, the story started to grow in my mind. And as Elaine said, it grew from 2 hours to 4 hours to 6 hours to 8 hours, and finally it was a whole series. And so when I sat down and wrote what was originally going to be the first 2 hours ultimately became the fourth 2-hour story. And so I sat down and wrote the other scripts. So the first ones, so I've written four of the 2-hour scripts already. And what was going to be the first one is now going to be the fourth one. So if you ever go back to our original Kickstarter campaign, the actors I'm talking about as being in Space Command actually now are in that fourth one. So it's Armin Shimmerman from Deep Space Nine and Buffy, Christina Moses, who just starred in Containment, Ethan Phillips from Star Trek, Voyager, etc. So
it's sort of like a loose torrent, and he sweeps more and more people
fun.
along in his
yes.
wake. Yes.
Well, the lovely thing is that all the actors I approached, many of them stars from shows I'd worked on, said yes. And so, I mean, my friend Mike Harney from Orange is the New Black, and Doug Jones, who starred in Pan's Labyrinth and Hellboy and The Strain. He's going to be starring in the new Star Trek TV show, Star Trek Discovery, and Mira Furlan from Babylon 5 and Lost, and Bill Mumy from Babylon 5 and Lost in Space, and Bob Picardo from Star Trek Voyager and Stargate Atlantis. These are wonderful actors. James Hong, who was in Blade Runner and Big Trouble in Little China, he's one of my heroes. He's phenomenal to work with. And Ferran Tahir, who was in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movie and Iron Man, and Elysium. I mean, these are phenomenal actors, and I'm honored to be working with them. It's just such a joy.
I wanted to go back to something you said about being adverse to learning something new and just giving something a try. Yes. I think you had written, I was just doing research last night, it was maybe on the Super Mentors or marczicree.com, but it was about learn something new. I think that was the title of the post, maybe I'm paraphrasing. Sure. But especially for people maybe Generation X or older, they don't want to learn something new. But millennials, I think, are much more open to it because they've been exposed to all of this technology. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that, to someone that is very set in their ways about working in a certain medium and it holds them back in some ways?
Well, here's the first question always is, what do you want to accomplish? And the second question is, am I succeeding at that? If you're not succeeding, then you have to change what you're doing if you're committed to reaching the finish line. Most people stay stuck in, the real question is, what is the operational phrase of your life? For many people, the operational phrase of their life is, I'm not getting what I want. Well, if that's the sentence that's ruling your life, you've got to find another sentence. And so it's much more liberating if the sentence is, I'm going to get to the finish line. And I'm going to learn what I need to learn. I'm going to find what I need to find. I'm going to team up with whom I need to team up with. I'm going to create what I need to create. So that's liberating. And so, but also you have to say, let me try something. And if it doesn't work, I'll try something else. A lot of people are very afraid of failing. And, it's very funny because, Elaine will often talk about, well, if you fell down in real life, would you just stay down? No, you'd get up. You'd continue on, And but a lot of people feel that if they fail, that's the end of it. The doom will ensue, and that's not what happens. And then it's another thing that I've always find very funny is when people say, well, life is like a river, and it'll take you where you're meant to go. And I always say to them, if you fell into a real river, would you have that opinion? And it's like, no, you'd swim like hell to get to the shore. Life is not like a river. Life is basically deciding what you want to accomplish. Life is not, it's very rarely that you're handed something on a plate where it's like, here, this will be easy. Almost everything we try to do is hard. It's difficult. But the more we're willing to say, well, I'm going to get where I'm going, that's what happens.
But it's more than what you want to accomplish. I think that there's a very poisonous thing that we get taught from the time that we're very small, which is that it's enough to not be happy. We don't think that if you're not happy that it's enough. That happiness is something that we deserve, that we all deserve. And to say that, well, I'm leading an okay life, I don't think that's okay. He doesn't think that's okay. It's like, no, if you're not feeling happy, if you're not feeling like you're doing your best, I really believe that all of us were born with gifts that belong to the world, and if we're too afraid to deliver them, well, that's just a loss. That's just sad. And I think a lot of that is linked to actually enthusiasm and feeling happy and giving that original piece that we're all born with.
Yeah. Well, a few years ago, I had to figure out the secret of life. I was going to be talking to an audience at a high school, and it was going to be parents and teenagers, their teenage kids, and their younger kids. And I thought, well, what do I want to talk about? And I thought, I just don't want to tell, war stories from working in Hollywood. So I thought, well, maybe it'd be useful if I told them the secret of life. So I had to figure out what that was. And it had to be simple so that even little kids could understand it. So what I said, as near as I can figure, the secret of life is be happy, be kind, be brave. That's it. And sometimes you can't be all three at once, but it's important to strive for those three things. And I think that will lead to a meaningful life and a life worth living. And also the other thing is that it's very easy to have an initial enthusiasm for a creative project, but it's very hard when things start to become difficult, when you have to be there for the long haul. And it's also particularly difficult because you don't know if you're going to succeed. So often you're in the darkness, and that's where you need to surround yourself with other people who have faith when you falter. Years ago, when I graduated from UCLA as an art major, by the time I got out of UCLA, I knew I wanted to be a writer rather than a visual artist, even though I'd had art, gallery shows of my work, my paintings and my photography when I was a teenager. I knew I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer, producer in TV, and there were no classes in how to do that. So I decided I would write a book about the Twilight Zone TV show to learn how to do that job. So I started writing the Twilight Zone Companion, and we started submitting it as a project to publishers. And for a 2-year period, it was rejected. It was rejected by 25 publishers. And had it just been me, I would have given up. But Elaine said, keep going, keep going. And we figured out why it wasn't selling. We fired the agent we had, who had been Rod Serling's literary agent, and we got another agent. She submitted it back to one of the publishers who had rejected it, to a different editor, and the book sold. And the book was an instant bestseller when it came out. It sold over 500,000 copies. It's still in print all these years later. But if I hadn't had Elaine in my life, who believed in me even when I faltered, I wouldn't have finished the book. Someone else would have come out with a book on the Twilight Zone, and I would have just spent the rest of my life in bars being bitter. So again,
which would have been odd because he doesn't drink.
Yeah, it would have been, really, I would have just been eating those peanuts and drinking like diet soda or something. It would have been a really wasted life. But again, it's very important to surround yourself with people who love you and people who believe in you. And it's a two-way street. So Elaine will falter and have dark days, and I'll say, no, let's keep on this path. So it's a two-way street, and that's really important.
And I'm wondering about fear of success, because I know that also is something that people think they don't have, but it's a huge thing because everything around you would then change. People treat you differently. Mm-hmm. Maybe people would be fearful of you or envious of you.
Yes, it's terrible to have a lot of money.
No.
We live in a gated community. I know, it would be terrible.
Part of it is a mythos of a golden door. Here I am, I have bad thoughts, I argue with my mom, I'm not a good enough person. But if I go through the golden door, everything will be changed and wonderful, and I'll wake up with my hair in order, and it's all going to be great. And it's this fear of this great transition of something that you can't come up to, or people will be waiting for you to fall. And there are people who, from envy, wait for you to fall. But if you don't see life as this, as that you can always fall on your face, but just that you are who you are, and you're just struggling on a slow, uphill struggle. There'll always be downs, but that you can always fight your way back up. I think some of that fear is that the publicity machines create an unrealistic vision of who you are when you write well. Like you're suddenly a celebrity and you're this different person. And no, you're the same schlubby person, but you write well,
But let me jump in on this a little bit, because there's several things about this. Part of fear of success, I think, is fear of scrutiny. Because the moment you're on the world stage and the spotlight's on you, you're very worried that, again, as Elaine was saying, you could falter, you could fail, etc. But the good part of it is that, first of all, you get paid very well, and that's very nice. And, but you have to make sure that the money doesn't rule you. So in other words, it's a good idea to keep your overhead low so that you don't have to take every job that's offered to you. We've turned down more work than we've taken because that allows us, first of all, to learn new skills. It also allows us to follow our own creative bent, whether or not it's immediately lucrative. So we're not ruled by money. We keep our overhead low. But also, there's two Hollywoods. There's a Hollywood of awful, materialistic, neurotic, crazy people who are destructive and toxic and dreadful. And they get a lot of the press. And there's another Hollywood, equally real, that's composed of people who are wonderfully talented, creating amazing work. They come from the heart, they love their families, they go home, they're not crazy, and they're doing it for the right reason. Each Hollywood is equally real, and those kind of people are all up and down the food chain. So what you have to decide is, first, which Hollywood you want to belong to, and secondly, which Hollywood you want to exemplify, you want to be. And so what I've done in my whole career, is I gravitate toward the good Hollywood. So when I started writing The Twilight Zone Companion, I was crawling through Rod Serling's attic. I was literally, and I was interviewing all the people who worked with him, and I was seeing what great people they were, creating great, wonderful work that changed the world, that made people better. Then I wrote the book with Guillermo del Toro, and one of my mentors was Ray Bradbury. So I was deliberately choosing people who, first of all, I could learn from, but secondly, who reinforced my belief that you could be a good person, you could speak from authenticity, you could be kind and compassionate, and that would not destroy your career. In fact, it would make your career better. You had a greater chance of succeeding by being authentic, by being genuine, by being loyal and honorable, than if you were some kind of Hollywood snake. Again, I think some people believe they have to turn themselves into monsters to succeed. The exact opposite is the truth. And I think that that's a very hopeful realization, because you don't have to betray yourself or other people in order to succeed.
But there is a definite fear among people that they're going to be found out. You know, if you're doing really, really well, they'll find out that you're really not that good.
Yes.
And and that really terrifies people. Oh, and what if I'm found out? But sometimes it eases one's burden to know that that's what most people feel. That they're going to be found out, no matter how famous they are, no matter for how long, they're eventually going to be found out for not being that amazing.
Well, but again, this is where it's so useful to interview these hugely successful people, these wonderful, brilliant artists, because you see what happens when they have rejections, when they have disappointments. There was this guy who he wanted to be a writer, and he wrote a script, and he sold his script. He had his first big sale to the networks. And so he traveled from Ohio to New York to have his first meeting with the producer and the director and all the actors around a table. And he dressed up in a suit and a tie, and he had a briefcase, and he went in to meet with them. And the meeting went really well, and he said everything just right, and the meeting came to an end, and he shook their hand, and he's headed for the door, and he was so nervous that he missed the door, walked into the wall, and dropped his briefcase, and his briefcase sprang open, and his socks and his underwear sprang out. So blushing furiously, he gathered up all the socks and the underwear, put them back in the briefcase, stumbled out into the corridor, into the hallway, and thought to himself, how can I ever face these people again? And the producer came out into the hallway and put his arm around this young writer, and he said, look, little friend, all they care about is what you have up here. And the writer was Rod Serling. And that was one of his first experiences in this industry. And so even Rod had those moments, and of course he became one of the great writers and one of the great showrunners. Which
he didn't know.
He didn't know. He died at age 50, and in the last interview he gave, the reporter said, do you think your work will last? And he said, good writing, like fine wine, has to age well with time. And he said, I think my work has been momentarily adequate. So he never knew. He never knew that Twilight Zone was going to be one of the great shows ever made, one of the greatest shows ever made, that would last and be even more popular now than when it aired.
So it's really dangerous to aim for great. You just say, I'm going to do the very best I can and tell the deepest truth I possibly can, and just see what happens,
Well, what you have control over is what you create. What you don't have control over is how it will be received. You don't have control over whether it will last. You don't have control over whether people will appreciate it. All you can do is say, okay, what's my truth? Rod used to say, about his own writing, he used to say, is this the truth as I know it, or better yet, as I feel it? well, that's all we can do, really.
And
All we have is our authenticity. All we have is our truth and our story.
Which is what I always say to actors, because I used to coach, actors, and it was like, what is your most important job? What's the first job? And I get all kinds of answers, and I say, well, no, your most important job is to tell your truth.
Yes.
To tell the truth of your character,
right.
Whatever that is. And because that's what people will connect with and share, and that's where we go out of the out of the theaters feeling a little less alone and a little more connected, because we recognize the truth.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not telling the truth, there's a real disconnect. There was a television show with a showrunner, and they were dealing with a very painful subject, which was sexual abuse of children, adult survivors, and I was watching this clip of this show. And it felt completely bogus. And I thought, well, it's important to have this on television because people tend to feel very isolated by these kind of ugly incidents. But if you have it in an exploitative fashion, then it's the opposite. It has the opposite effect. It doesn't make people feel more connected or less shamed. It makes people feel more isolated because it's not their truth up there. Mm. And so I was quite offended by the show, not the topic, but the way in which it was handled. And I said, what research did you do for this? They said, oh, well, we just thought we could imagine what it would be like. And I thought, enough said, and that was really clear in this show. And so, the truth is very, very important. And if you don't know the truth and you're going to present what you want to be the truth, you better research it, because this isn't a joke.
Well, you should know what you're talking about.
Yes, you owe it to your audience.
Yeah.
You're being given a great privilege to speak to hundreds of thousands, or hundreds of people, thousands of people, millions of people. Mm. It's a great privilege. And if you lie, well, shame on you. It hurts people. It does.
But also, and this guy was very, very successful. And so it's not our responsibility whether or not someone else succeeds or not, whether their work is deserving or not. It's our responsibility to tell our truth, to do our job. That's all we have control over, And also it's very important to know what's a game you can't win. So for instance, if you're pitching a story to a network or a studio and that's not what they want to make, then the question ultimately becomes, how committed are you to what you want to do? Because at the end of the day, you have to decide what you're going to create. And if you say, okay, because as I said, we mentor many, many, many people, and we've done so for many years. And most people give up at the slightest resistance. And it's very important, if you're actually going to create something worthwhile, to have a backbone, and to say, okay, look, someone once asked me the secret of my success, and I said I don't give myself an out. That means that if I say I'm going to do something, I have to do it. and sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it's harder. But it's irrelevant if it's hard. It's just what I take on, and I'm committed to doing it. But it's also exhilarating. It's so much fun. I love what I do.
Yes, you don't want to ever hear somebody say, "Well, they won't let me." I don't know who they is.
Yeah.
But if
they're imaginary playmates.
Yes.
Yeah.
But if buyer A doesn't want it, well, do your research and find buyer B and buyer C who is good with that kind of topic, who will help you say it.
Well, but also in the old days, when there were only 3 networks and it would cost millions of dollars and you had to shoot on 35 millimeter, then there was an excuse. If, like, for instance, Orson Welles, the last 20 years of his life, he never got to make a movie. Well, that wasn't his fault. He was trying hard. It was just so expensive. He was in an art form that was crazily expensive. But nowadays, when you can buy, everyone has a camera in their phone, for God's sake. If you want to make something, make it. And there also is a question, if you want a career in Hollywood, and by Hollywood I mean sort of this world art form that we work in, you have to say, well, what am I in it for? Am I in it because I want to be rich, because I want that Hollywood dream of the big house and the limousine? Well, that's one dream. It's not my dream, God knows. Or is it that you want to create something to share with the world? Well, if it's the latter, then anytime you say, well, they're not letting me do it, it means that you're just letting them stop you, and you're not saying, okay, what skills do I need to learn? Who do I need to affiliate with? If you decide that you're going to greenlight yourself, then you're free.
But of course, if you say they won't let me do it, then you've got your good excuse.
Yes, and the question always is, do you want to live in the excuse or do you want to live in the action? Because, and again, it's not for us to say what someone else should do, but it's up to us to...
But isn't it tempting?
Yeah, really. But it's up to us to be authentic, and if we inspire others, that's great. If someone hears any of what we're saying and says, well, gosh, let me take a crack at this, let me try, and if you try and you keep trying and you find the way through the door, then you usually do quite well. There was another friend of mine who he decided he wanted to be the greatest writer who ever lived. True story. And he went to a psychiatrist. And after an hour of talking about this stuff, the psychiatrist said to this young man, he said, well, I think I can cure you of this delusion, so you should come see me twice a week. And my friend left that session and decided that instead of doing that, he would just go for it. And that was Ray Bradbury. And he became, of course, one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. And Ray told me that story. He was my mentor for over 10 years. And so again, one man's delusion is another man's great accomplishment. And what determines that often is just the drive. I think Ray once told me that his life was the story of someone who decided he was going to go somewhere and went.
Going back to the idea for Space Command,
Sure.
How long have you actually been working on it? Since the very beginning, like the idea, the inception?
It was like 1832. It was, no, the initial idea for Space Command came about in 2012.
Oh,
And
perfect year.
so it was a few years. And but it was really in germinating in my head for a long, long time, because again, I wanted to create a hopeful vision of the future. I wanted to do for the modern audience what Star Trek had done for me as a kid. And so I really was starting to put the pieces together, and also I was collecting actors. As in my career in television, I was working on a lot of science fiction shows and gathering a lot of actors that I really wanted to work with again and write roles for. And I recently wrote a book with Guillermo del Toro, and I won the Saturn Award a couple of years ago, and I saw this amazing guy in this Victorian coat, this tall, thin guy, really remarkable looking, and I went up to him at the Saturn Awards to congratulate him on the coat and how he looked, and it was an actor named Doug Jones, and Doug is in pretty much everything Guillermo does. He played Pan in Pan's Labyrinth and Abe Sapien in Hellboy, and he's in The Strain, and he's in just pretty much everything, Crimson Peak. And he's been in tons of other things. He's the lead alien in Falling Skies. So we had lunch, really hit it off, and I told him I was going to write a role for him, a lead, and that's what we did in Space Command. And so the crowdfunding campaign was in 2012, and that along with the investment shares that we sold and are still continuing to sell, gave us the money to open our own studio. And then, as I said, I wrote the first 8 hours of the show and outlined hours 9 through 12. And Elaine and I have been actually co-writing on this, and so that was this big tapestry, this great big canvas, and so it just kind of grew and grew as I started to know who the characters were and what the story was. I knew I wanted to tell a multi-generational story, and I wanted to have a multinational, multi-ethnic, multiracial cast. So our actors are white and black and Asian and Latino, and our actors come from Venezuela and Pakistan and Sri Lanka, all around the world. And I cast many famous actors, but we also had a talent search where anyone anywhere in the world could download the audition scenes and audition for 2 of our leads. And we got 7,000 inquiries and 1,200 videos. And we ultimately ended up casting 6 actors from those auditions, and including 2 of our leads. And from Wyoming, from New York, from Iowa, from all over the place. And so Space Command kind of came together in bits and pieces, and it still comes. It's funny because once you start shooting something, the actors and their performances and the chemistry between them also is something that starts to alter your vision. It becomes a dialogue between you and them, if you do it well, and so then you say, oh well, here's an interesting way of doing it, or here's an interesting way of having it pay off. Also, because we jump back and forth over 5 generations of our characters. There's 4 families, and we see the action and reaction. We go back and forth between that over a 150-year period. And so for instance, the first 2-hour story takes place at one point 60 years from now, and then the second 2-hour story takes place 3 years after that, and then at various points we're jumping 90 years later and coming back. So it's really this very interesting tapestry that we get to see. So I really love that. I haven't seen that before. I haven't seen anyone else do that.
And it's very interesting to see actors develop and own a role.
Yes.
And that definitely does mold and usually deepen. You're starting to rewrite and throw in extra scenes because they themselves just really step deeply into the character.
Yeah.
And things come alive that you hadn't seen. Relationships come alive that you hadn't seen. And so the talent hunt was amazing because there's brilliant acting all over the world. We only cast 6 people, but we would have liked to have cast a lot more. They just didn't quite fit the role as well. But they were fine actors all over the country. And so that was fun, and it was fun
around the world, actually.
all around the world.
Yeah.
And it was really fun with Doug Jones, who is a wonderful actor, but he usually is almost like a mime because he plays creatures.
Right.
But he's a stunningly beautiful man. And so in this, we finally get to see him, and we get to see
what he looks like. He has a great delicate face.
Extremely delicate, and a very sensitive actor.
Great guy.
And so it's grand to be able to, give him that stage and let people see what a consummate actor he is with very little makeup.
Well, there was an interesting thing that happened on set. We were shooting the first chunk. We've shot Space Command in various chunks because we have a lower budget than a studio film would have, or a TV show. We had to be very clever in how we utilized our money, so it was used effectively. So we shot 4 days of the first 2-hour story, and then came back several months later on some of the other sets we built and shot the rest of it. And so the first several days we were shooting all of Doug Jones's scenes, and Mira Furlan and Bill Mumy and so forth, and there was a lot of dialogue to cover. We were shooting 8 to 12 pages a day. And Doug Jones was very nervous about being able to remember all the lines, even though with all of our actors, we had other actors with them to just run the lines when they weren't on, when we weren't shooting.
Or they were just right. On camera to throw the line. We said, look, we can edit. Never worry about dropping a line because it will be thrown right back at you, and we can cut into it. And when we stopped making them nervous, when they weren't nervous about it, they usually remembered their line. It was just nerves that would send them up.
Well, what I said to Doug was, because he was nervous about getting the lines and doing all the lines, and I said, look, as Elaine said, we can pick it up. It's not about the lines. I said, we're here for one purpose and one purpose only. I said, you have an amazing soul, and our job here is to show the audience your soul, and that's all we're here to do. And so don't worry about the lines. And the irony was, from then on, he never blew a line, not once. And so he was able to relax. But he did a phenomenal job. His performance is terrific. And we're going to continue ongoingly to utilize his character, because we have 2 viewpoint characters, what I call viewpoint characters, over the 150 years. Because most of the characters grow old and age and die and so forth. They have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But Doug Jones is a synthetic human. He's an android, a replicant. So he covers the entire 150 years as a viewpoint character. And Mira Furlan plays a human, but she's been genetically altered, where she's very hard to kill. She's practically immortal, and so again, she'll be another viewpoint character over that time frame. And her character has a daughter who hasn't been genetically altered, so she ages in a normal time frame. And Mira's also in a gay marriage. She's married to a woman, because again, I want the world of Space Command to match the world I live in. And it was very interesting when Sally Ride was the first American female astronaut, and it was only when she died that they mentioned her longtime companion. And I said, well, why didn't everyone know that she was gay? I mean, where are the gay women in science fiction? Where are the gay women in science? And I think it's very important that we know that all these people, that the world is what the world is, that it's inclusive, and I want Space Command to be inclusive. And so that was very fun to write that and have that in Space Command, as well as we have Muslim characters, we have all sorts of characters, and again, to present the commonality of humanity, so that we don't see people as the other, we see them as ourselves.
What has this 5-year pursuit taught you about dreams, making them happen, setbacks, coming back again? What has it taught you about a journey of seeing something evolve and come to life?
Sure. Do you want me to take that?
Yeah,
sure. All of my major projects, I know going in will take years. So for instance, when I wrote The Twilight Zone Companion, which was my first book, that took 5 years, from the month I started to the month the book came out. The book has been in print for over 30 years now. And when I was writing it, someone said to me, well, when are you going to be done? And I said, I'll be done when it's right. And because I took the time to make it right, it stood the test of time, it lasted. The book I just wrote with Guillermo del Toro took me 4 years. And during all these periods, I'm working on multiple projects. I like to multitask. I like to do many things at once. My new Space Command would be a massive project. The first 2 hour story has 1,900 visual effects shots. That's more than Star Wars. And a big episode of Battlestar Galactica would have 200 visual effects shots. This has 1,900 in the first 2 hours. So I knew that it would be incredibly ambitious. But the steps in Space Command were raise the money to get the thing going, continue to raise money by selling shares, shoot the first 2 hours, and then lock down a powerful agency that then gives me the credibility to go and pitch the networks and sell the show. And so all of those things are very time-consuming, and it's like a military campaign. So I knew it would take years, but we're further along. We're closer to being toward the finish line than toward the beginning, because we've shot, 2 hours we've shot the entire first story. We shot 30 minutes of the second story, and now I'm pitching the series. And whoever buys it will have to pick up the first season, and that's 12 episodes. And we're getting a very good response. But it comes from putting in the work, because now we can say, this is what this is what it looks like, here it is, here's the thing itself. And that's a great experience.
There's a truism about almost any television show or film where everybody at the end said, if I'd known it had been this hard, I never would have started it. But once you're in it, you can't turn around. Then they jump into another project, as though they had no memory of what had just happened.
Right.
So I think, some of it is kind of a wild horse, but when you're on, you're not too eager to let go.
But there are twists and turns, and there are disappointments, and certain things you can't foresee. For instance, we brought aboard, there was a visual effects genius that I'd worked with many times in my career. He won an Emmy for Star Trek Voyager. He designed Babylon 5 and reinvented television, how visual effects were done in television. And he did the Star Trek episode that I did with Elaine and I did with George Takei, that we did a few years ago, that got nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula Awards. So I brought him aboard Space Command, and he fell ill and sadly died. His name was Ron Thornton, and he was a genius. But sadly, he didn't get to see us through to the finish line, and that's just what life does sometimes. You never know. He was like 59. It's very sad. And so, but again, you just try stuff.
For anyone who wants to produce, I'm more producer than Marc. Marc is,
Elaine's better and wiser than me in every way.
No, I'm a detail person. But I always say, the thing is that some people feel things are going awry, that they're not producing well, that's just what happens. That's being a producer. So I try sort of seeing producing anything is like it's a spinning ball.
Right.
It's spinning very quickly, and things are flying off into space. And your job as a producer is to tack back things as quickly as you can, and always make the assumption that the thing you're going to tack back on will be better than the thing that's whirled off into space. And you're not doing anything wrong. That's just the nature of production.
Right.
And if you have that headset and you're not like beating yourself up, you're just moving as fast as you can and keeping your eye on the ball, you'll be a much happier producer.
Right. And also, again, Elaine, it's funny because Elaine and I have been together for 40 years and married for 39, and have worked together so much, people assume we're very similar. But in reality, we're very, very different. Elaine, for one, is sane. but seriously, she's calmer than I am. I'm a worrier. My head is very, very busy. I beat myself up a lot. But I'm the one with the big vision. I'm the one who, I'll take on something that's crazily big. For instance, when I wrote the Twilight Zone Companion, I started that book 2 years after Rod Serling died. And I had graduated from UCLA with a degree in painting, sculpture, and graphic arts. I had sold one short story. I had never sold an article. I had never taken a journalism class. And I decided I was going to write a book about the Twilight Zone. Now, I had already heard that Carol Serling, Rod's widow, had turned down major journalists. So if I had asked 100 people what my chance of getting Rod Serling's widow to let me do a book about the Twilight Zone was, 100 people would have said, you have no chance. I was 22 years old. But it's not a majority opinion. Your fate is not a majority opinion. You outvote the world if you decide you're going to do something. And so then it just became strategic. It's like, how do I go about doing this? So what I did was, I had met one writer from the Twilight Zone, George Clayton Johnson. I met him when I was 16 years old at a science fiction convention, and we became friends. So I interviewed him about the Twilight Zone. He connected me up with 2 other people who worked on the show, and I interviewed them. And over a 3-month period, I interviewed 30 people who had worked on the show. Then I went to Carol Serling. And by then, I knew a lot about the show. And I felt very confident that I could do this book. And so I went to her house. It was Rod's house. It was exactly as Rod had left it. His Emmys were there, 6 Emmys. There was one room just for the trophies. And so 6 Emmys, 3 Hugos, the Peabody Award, all that stuff. His dog was still there, the senile Irish setter. His office was intact, exactly as he'd left it. And I remember standing in this huge living room with Carol Serling sitting on the couch, and for some reason I was standing, and I told her what I had in mind. And I could envision that future of my completing the book successfully as clearly as I see you. And I spoke very convincingly, and I knew what I was talking about because I'd done my research. And And she talked to some of the people I'd interviewed and the people she knew and trusted, and they clearly gave me a good bill of health, a good report, because she came back and she said, okay, you've got full access to everything. And so I spent several years crawling through Rod's attic, and in his garage there were the 16mm film prints in these big film cans of the Twilight Zone episodes. And I would take home a stack like this and put them on the projector. They had the original commercials, the coming attraction spots. Some of these prints had never even been through a projector. And I wrote the book. And but it was a crazily ambitious project, as is Space Command. And I actually enjoy big challenges.
But you had World Enough in Time as a test run.
Yeah, well, that was another crazy thing to do. It was, that was sort of the test run. As Elaine said, it was basically, I was at a science fiction convention, and this is just when Star Trek and when Enterprise was kind of fading, it was dying down, the fans hadn't really embraced it, and this is before J.J. Abrams said he was going to do the Star Trek movie. And so I was on a panel for Star Trek, because I wrote for Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and someone from the audience said, well, what's the future of Star Trek? And Walter Koenig, who had played Chekhov, gave this answer, and it was a crazy answer, and it was so crazy that afterwards I said, tell me all about this. And I talked to him for about an hour, and he told me that there were a group of fans in upstate New York who had built a full-size copy of all the original Star Trek sets from the blueprints, and they were shooting their own Star Trek episodes and putting them online, and they were getting a larger audience than Enterprise was getting on UPN. And he was about to fly to New York and be in an episode starring himself as Chekhov and written by Dorothy Fontana, who had written and story edited the original Star Trek series. So that night I went online, and they had an episode of that they had done, which was a sequel to an episode the original Star Trek had done called The Doomsday Machine, and it had William Wyndham, who'd been in the guest star in that episode, and it was great fun. And so a friend of mine years ago had come up with a great Sulu episode. They were going to bring Star Trek back in the 70s, Paramount was. And then Star Wars came out, and after a year of development, they made the movie instead of the series they'd been developing. And so my friend had pitched to them a great Star Trek episode starring Sulu, and it didn't get made. And both he and I had written for Star Trek The Next Generation. He was an Emmy winner, and I called him and I said, you want to write this episode? He said, sure. The two of us. And so I called the boys in upstate New York, and I said, hey, we want to do this Sulu episode, and I'd want to direct it, because I'd always wanted to direct. And they said, sure. And I said, but we have to shoot high def. They'd been shooting mini DV. And they said, yeah, well, if you can get the cameras. And I said, okay. And then I went to George Takei, and I sat in his kitchen, his living room, actually, dining room. And I gave him, I typed up a 3-page outline of what the story would be. And I said, you never got the great Sulu episode you deserved. This is it. I need you to tell me if you'll do it. So he sat there and he read the 3 pages, and he said, I'm in. So we spent 6 months building our production team. We shot 9 days in upstate New York on the Enterprise sets. We built Sulu's ship, what's it called? The Sulu ship, the Excelsior? Yes, it's the Excelsior. So we built Sulu's ship, the Excelsior, here in LA. So we shot 2 days here in LA, and 1 day in Florida with the effects team. It was a solid year of post-production, 700 visual effects shots. It's called Star Trek World Enough in Time. You can actually watch it on my website, marczicree.com, in its entirety. And it got nominated for the Hugo and Nebula, which are the 2 top awards in science fiction. First time any independent project had ever been nominated for those awards. We did it without a studio or a network. We did it for under $100,000. And it looked as good as any network show you'd ever see. And I showed it, I said to George when we were shooting, a year from now, you and I will be at the World Science Fiction Convention in Japan. We'll be showing this to an audience of several thousand people. And at the end, we'll answer questions. I'll be speaking in English. You'll be speaking in Japanese, because he's fluent. And I said, a year later, we'll be nominated for the Hugo. And all of that stuff came true. And when we showed it in Japan, there was 3,000 people in the audience, and we got a standing ovation. People were in tears at the end, because it was so moving. And so, so I had that vision. I was speaking a future that I made happen. And but the fact that I was able to do that without a studio or a network showed that I could create something without that infrastructure, and that showed me that I could do Space Command, and that gave me the credibility to pull it off.
Oh, that all sounds so smooth in the telling. There were quite a few bumpy bits as we were doing this.
Yes.
The team got very worried about high def, the initial team, because they were very worried that it would show a multitude of flaws in their sets, which it did not. I mean, their sets were beautiful, yeah. But there was a lot of concern about high def, which they then used from then on. But there were many, and the acting of the initial team who had put it together, they were fans. Right. They needed a little bit of polishing for some of them. Some of them were pros, some of them were not. and they were good enough to be enthusiastic about actor camp, which we set up. So we had an actor camp, but there were a lot of little.
Well, we rehearsed with them. We
rehearsed with them.
We did
yeah.
improv. We wanted to see who had the strongest acting chops of the actors.
And they were very
place.
open to learning. So that the one who was playing Captain Kirk, the fellow who was playing Captain Kirk, who was okay, he was fine, but at one point he was like really eager. He was working, and he got applauded after one scene that he had done, and then he was really, with the learning curve. So. But there was a lot of tension. People were being pressed to come to a really high level, and that's where I was. My job was being the HHDH, which was the hothead dehotifier, when people were starting to get a little bit tense.
Well, it can get very intense on a shoot.
It can, and he was just driving it.
Sure.
So it was, and the final day. You should talk about George Takei on that final day.
Well, he was just amazing. We shot a very, very long day. And the last take he did was one take, and it was perfect. And
how many hours was that?
20,
like a 20-hour day.
Crazy.
And he was up there.
Phenomenal.
After a 20-hour day, never a complaint.
Yeah.
And
we'd spent months lifting weights and getting in shape. He lost 15 pounds to do
and he
the
wasn't
role.
in bad shape.
No.
He got into great shape. And then he was
phenomenal.
on cue after like a 20-hour day. He was standing on that stage
on the transporter.
On the transporter stage with a single tear tracking down his face exactly on cue.
Well, that was appropriate to the scene. It wasn't that he was crying because he'd been working for 20 years.
No, it was on cue. He was just phenomenal. So there was a tremendous pressure. So I mean, there are a lot of stories, but so it wasn't easy. It's never easy.
You have to be crazily driven.
Yes.
You have to just be the engine that doesn't stop, and that's when you have a calling. That's when you, if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, if you're doing it because you want to prove something to your parents, or you want to, as I said, make a lot of money, or you want to just kind of do crap work and have that somehow slide by, those are all the wrong reasons. There's a friend of mine, his name's Frank Spotnitz. He was executive producer of The X-Files. He created and ran Man in the High Castle, and he's got 4 shows on the air right now. And he said, good enough is never good enough. And I absolutely believe that.
But with these fans, they were like really driven. They were doing it out of love. And even if they get angry at each other, there's never enough time, there's never enough resources. You're always trying to protect your department against other departments, but you're trying to do your best job. But they're still, for all of the tensions, they were a delight to work with because they were doing what they loved.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking back to something a mentor said to the two of you individually, maybe even before you met one another,
Sure.
What was it, and what is it? What statement was that, or mantra that never left you? Could be Ray Bradbury, could be...
Sure.
It's a funny thing, but the thing that most affected me was a script doctor, a very good script doctor that I had. And there was a script I'd written. It was one of my favorite scripts, ultimately. But she said, "This is brilliant. I absolutely love it. Now, here's the notes." But the fact that she said that I was brilliant and that she loved it, I thought, well, what the heck with a few notes? I'm brilliant and I love it. So I think, crazy flattery, I realized sort of the weight of allowing somebody to feel special and be special. With crazy flattery, that all those notes seemed like nothing. So, one of the biggest pieces of advice was that, hey, what you're doing has super value. Now here's the work. And just going on that thing where I was allowed to have super value at the top of the journey, really got me through, as though it was nothing, those notes.
Mm-hmm. In terms of of me, the mentors, what they've told me, it's funny because the mentors really who've guided me have been Rod Serling, Ray Bradbury, Guillermo del Toro, and what really inspired me was the fact that these are guys who just come from enormous enthusiasm, creative enthusiasm. And one thing Ray said to me was, he said, "Don't look outside yourself, look within." And so it's again finding, it's funny, there was one time when he and I were sitting together and I said, "I just figured out what business you're in." I said, "It's not writer." I said, "You're in the Ray Bradbury business." And he said, "Yes, that's exactly right." And what he was doing was creating something that no one else could create. And he told me that he wrote every day for 10 years before he wrote a single line, a single word that was uniquely his. And then one day he sat down and he wrote the words "the lake." And he wrote a short story based on the time when he was a little boy. When he was 8 years old, he and a little girl friend who was 7 went swimming in Lake Michigan. And he came out and she never did. She drowned. And it was a story about her coming back as a ghost. And he told me that when he finished the story, tears were streaming down his face. And he knew he'd written something that no one else could have written. It came specifically from his experience and his soul. And he said it took another 2 years of writing every day before he could write something again that was uniquely his. And then he got to where he could do it again and again and again. And he became Ray Bradbury because he was determined to do that. And so I thought that was a great lesson to say, okay, what are you creating? What can you create that isn't something that's just an imitation of what others are doing, but that's unique to you, that no one else could have created, that you create something fresh in the world that's truthful and meaningful, and then you know you've done something worth doing. So that's been a great inspiration to me.
There's be so many people, because they're so afraid of being hurt, they do the safe thing. So that somebody says, that's not very good, they say, oh, I know, it was a piece of trash, I was just doing what everybody else was doing. So
Right.
you do put yourself out for a far greater vulnerability, but then
With something original.
I mean, if you do something original, but then to not do so is slowly soul killing.
Yeah, say that quickly.
I failed to say it quickly. I tripped all over myself.
Yeah.
So yes, it is. It's like being worn down by the ocean. You know,
Yeah.
a sea cliff. It just does. And so one of the things, like as an example, when we worked together for TV, if we got a note, it wouldn't matter if it was a dumb note or not. Sometimes the notes were great, but sometimes the notes were dumb, and we made a pact that no matter how dumb the note felt initially, we would not hand in that draft until we were able to work that note in a way which made it better.
So every draft had to be better than the previous draft. And so no matter how challenging the notes were, we would find the way to do that. And my friend Doug Hayes, who was one of the great directors of the Twilight Zone, he did Eye of the Beholder and The After Hours and The Howling Man, many other episodes. He was also a very good writer. And he said, when you get notes, the executives giving the notes are often not writers. And so the solution they're offering may not work, but there's a concern under the note. There's something that's not working for them, and what they're saying the solution is may not be the right solution, and never put in something in your script that doesn't work. But you have to look at what the concern is. You have to figure out what the concern is and address that. And if you come up with an alternative that does work, they'll be satisfied even if the solution they offered isn't the one that you utilized, as long as the concern is addressed. And that was a great piece of wisdom.
So you really want to maintain a pride of workmanship, and not just say, oh, you know, you never toss it off. Firstly, you don't do that to the audience.
You give it your best, no matter what.
Because it represents you, and you make it represent you, and you see it even on people on like on assembly lines where you develop something you don't care versus something that you care about, and you take you're allowed a little bit of pride in what you do, which I think is just critical to the way humans work. And so yes, we put up that fight, but like I always remember, just as when we're teaching, because there was a woman who shared with me. She had an action piece with these man and woman in this action thing, and it was like nonstop action, going and going and going. And the woman said, who was the executive, well, it sort of drags in the second act. It really drags. And she flared, but knew enough to keep it to herself. And she said, well, let me look at that it was dragging in the second act. And saying, how could it drag? It's like there was nonstop action. And then it hit her on the way home that it wasn't that it was nonstop action, it's that in Act 1, she had not set up us caring sufficiently about the leads and the outcome for those leads for us to care what kind of threat they were facing, because we didn't care. And so she said, okay, well, she's going to like deepen the characters and much more focus on their need and our investment in their journey. She's going to slow down the second act, still keeping it exciting, but she's going to slow it down so that we really know what the struggle is about. And the reason that it seemed slow was we just didn't care. And the executive then said, this is much better, now it really rolls along. Now she couldn't analyze why she didn't care in the second act, but she was dead on. By the second act we were getting restive and simply didn't care because we didn't know who was in the struggle, and so why would we care?
So sometimes they don't communicate what's really going on, they just know that it's falling flat.
Yes,
Exactly.
It's not their responsibility to make the script work, it's your responsibility. And so they've hired you because you're a professional writer. And so everyone, executives get a bad rap. Most of them are very smart and very talented and very driven, and they're in the business because they love it. And everyone wants a script to work. Everyone wants a movie to work. Nobody wants to create something that fails. And so but it's very challenging. I mean, it's hard to make anything good. And so, but if you decide that you're going to give everything your best effort, that you're going to bring everything you've got to every job, that's a good starting point. And so that's been true in my whole career. Yeah, I started in animation, and whether it was writing Smurfs or Space Command, I mean, it's and I don't just write things with an S starting the title, but you know, you say, okay, I'm gonna bring everything I've got to this, and that gives you certain professional integrity.
And yes, the executives, they're paid to get a sense of a story, but you're paid because you have the analysis in your brain as to accept, okay, there's something wrong, I have to figure out what is wrong specifically, but they have picked up that something is wrong and they're probably accurate.
But sometimes you'll need to have, that's where it's good to have friends who are very talented, so that if you're stuck, you can call them and say, look, can we just bat this thing around a little bit? I got to figure this out. And Elaine is my sounding board. So for instance, and sometimes it'll be like, okay, this works, but how can we make this better? How can we go deeper? How can it be more meaningful? And that's very important.
What's the biggest obstacle or setback you feel that each of you has faced personally in your careers?
Yeah.
You don't have to be specific as terms of what project, but just in terms of how you worked through it.
I think it's rarely a setback. It's that you get tired. Sometimes you get tired, and when you get tired, then things start to hit you, and you cannot see a way around. You know, whereas if you got a good night's sleep, sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. I think it's the wear and tear, and that's where you really have to say, never get into this life alone. You know, always have somebody to back you up, a friend, or you know, in this case, we have a spouse who's a friend.
Well, we also have the table.
When we have, we have the table, which we can talk about in 1 second. But the whole thing is to say, this whole thing about rugged individualism and by your bootstraps, that's just not the way people operate. You know, it's one of my favorite songs is "Lean on Me," and someday I'll need someone to lean on, and I think that's really true. So it's the day-to-day grind. You know, you hope for something. Sometimes his hopes are higher than mine, so I don't have as big setbacks because I'm always a little more wary than he is, and he'll say, "Oh, this is great. Oh, dear, no." So it's like a much, you know, it's a bigger hit when it goes down. But still, it's that, you know, if you don't expect to, if you know there's somebody you can turn to and say, "I'm just down today. It's just I just had a bad day," and someone can say it's okay. You've got the, you know, somebody can just say it's okay. Keep going. That's the big. I'd say just dealing with other people is the trick, and don't lock it down. You were going to talk about the table.
Well, yeah. I mean, we run this roundtable of writers and directors and actors and producers and editors and composers, etc. That's several thousand people. We've been running it every Thursday for 24 years, and it's to create a compassionate community in Hollywood. And now we have offshoots all over the country. And again, it was because I wanted to create the Hollywood I wanted to live in. And Hollywood can be very corrosive, it can wear you down. You have to really be very careful of who you're giving judgment to, who's in judgment of you, where you internalize that. Because if it's people who are hateful, who are toxic, who are cruel, that can destroy you. And so you have to surround yourself with people who are loving, people who are kind, and it's hugely important. And because at the end of the day, you have to build a life. The life is ultimately more important than this script or this project or any of it. You have to have a life where you're loved and you're loving, where you have people who, as Elaine said, when you falter, will be there for you. And again, it has to be, you know, lean on me is good if it's going both ways. It isn't like, well, let me drain your life force and leave you an empty husk, you know, which is what some people do, you know. And so you have to make sure that it's reciprocal, and that's what we, with the roundtable that we run, that's what we teach, and even the classes we teach where we mentor people. What we often say is, your career will be defined by 2 poles: what you stand for and what you won't stand for. But you have to know what those 2 things are. And a lot of people, particularly actors can end up being very successful but feeling very empty because they're doing roles that are not in alignment with what they themselves believe. And so you have to decide, well, what do I believe? What is meaningful to me? And then how can I do work that speaks from that and speaks to that? And
because there's a habit of executives who are not artists to sort of project, who the hell are you, you know? And it's very hard to answer that, but if you know what you stand for, like if you say, what I take a stand for, the message that I'm going to give is that as long as you keep trying, as long as you're in the game, then you're a hero. You know, let's say that's what you want to stand for. And if I say, well, who the hell are you? You say, I'm the person who stands for this message, and it's an important message. And they can't get to you in that way if you really are clear on what you stand for. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's always hard, and the good thing about, like at the table, let's say you've made, you advertise, I made 5 calls, and it's 5 no's. But then you're getting applause for having picked up the phone 5 times, and that you're going to make 5 more calls the next day. You get applauded for going, you're going in the game, you're still fighting on. And I think that we all sort of need that, to say, hey, I made 5 calls, I'm going to make 5 calls tomorrow. It's okay, that's what it takes. It takes 100 calls to get the 1 yes, but I'm going to make those 100 calls. I'm going to get that yes. And it's very interesting if you track how people have struggled, that my favorite films, if you listen to the filmmakers, well, it took them 10 years to get it mounted. It took, lots of insults. It took people, battering them down, but they ended up making something brilliant, which a lot of people didn't see, but they saw, and then they gifted me with it. Yes. So I think that it's more realistic to say, hey, let's applaud each other for the effort.
Well, and also, there was a question that was asked earlier about, well, Space Command's taken 5 years so far, and but the lovely part is we now have a completed rough cut of the first 2 hours, and we're generating the visual effects on the first 2 hours now. And so we get to watch the story beginning to end. And it's a wonderful story, and the actors are quite wonderful, and the performances are great, and the story is meaningful. So that's very heartening as well. There's a very interesting dividing line between when you have the footage and when you don't. Before you shoot, before you have the footage in the can, everything can conspire to have the thing not exist. So if you stop before you've actually shot the film or the pilot or whatever it is, then it's in great danger of never existing. The moment you shoot, the moment you've got it in the can, then it simply becomes bringing assets to bear to finish. Then it's just about visual effects, color correction, sound design. Those are very doable, but you've got the story. It exists. It's like if you write a novel, if you finish the novel, at least there's a book that's beginning to end, and then you can refine it.
No one will know how long you took to write it.
Yes, to write it. But it's very important to finish what you start. Because first of all, if you finish what you start, you can finish what you start. And again, another enemy is perfectionism. You don't want to have perfectionism stop you from starting or stop you from finishing. It's very important to finish things and then refine. Ray Bradbury, who was my mentor for over 10 years, when he wrote, he would describe it as vomit, then mop, which means you write, you pour it out, then you refine it, but you start by pouring it out without judgment. And in his youth, what he would do is he would sit down on a Monday, write an entire short story in one sitting, then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday he would refine it, Friday he would mail it off, and then Monday he would start all over again. He was writing 50 stories a year. And an amazing output. And actually, he kept the same writing schedule for over 70 years. He was an amazing man, and a great inspiration. I was very lucky that I got to know him, and I'd go over to his house once a month for over 10 years, and we just talk about life and art and career. And I'm actually writing a book now called My Ray Bradbury that's about my friendship with Ray, because he told me many things that were never in print, never published. And I'm thrilled to be able to share that.
And of course, a few key members of our team told us not to start shooting on our start time for Space Command.
Oh yeah, well that's, again, sometimes you have to be very careful of listening to people who are faint of heart, because a big part of finishing anything is having the daring to start. Because again, once something is in existence, once it's in motion, momentum is enormously helpful. Because then people see the train is moving, and then they often want to jump on board because something's actually happening. A lot of people, they're all talk. A lot of people flake. You really have to look around you and say, okay, who finishes what they start? Who actually is serious about this? And affiliate with those people. Because there's an energy that leads toward success, and there's an energy that leads toward failure. And you really have to be mindful of that and observant. And again, this is why I've surrounded myself with last night at the table, I was mentioning that I collect showrunners, Now, the showrunner is the executive producer who runs a network show. But I do collect these people. I do get to know, like, if someone's doing a show that I love, I'll reach out to them. I'll go to an event. I'll meet them. And then we form a friendship. And a lot of these people are my mentors. They're my advisors. They're my friends. And it goes both ways. So they'll ask me for advice. It's funny, I was having lunch a few weeks with a dear friend of mine who's run a number of shows. He's also a very talented director and writer. And he had just sold a pilot, and he just couldn't get the story to work. So he said, listen, is it okay if I ask you and just walk through this with you? And so we talked, and he said, this is what the story is, but here's all the things I don't know. And I said, oh, well, that's easy. And I just said, okay, here's how it goes. And within about, 20 minutes, we totally worked the thing out. But he, he had the courage and the confidence in himself to be able to say, I don't know how this goes, and can you help me? And he's not paying me, I'm not being hired, and that's fine. It's a two-way street.
That was the great thing about Shakespeare in Love.
Yes, what the?
Well, Shakespeare went to another writer to ask to work through a story point in the film Shakespeare in Love.
Yeah, that's very funny.
And so we both, really like that story point, because any writer knows that you end up frequently bouncing something
off other people.
Yeah.
Yes, because again, it's not about being perfect. It's about getting the job done.
When you finish a screenplay, what is the standard protocol of steps you'll go through after it's done?
Well, I don't know.
Well, the first thing is to figure out when it's done.
Yes.
And so after you finish the first draft, it's very sad when you're new to the job and you finish your first draft and you think it's done, and of course the first draft you're not even close to being done.
Yeah, the end is often the beginning.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But so the first thing that you do is you put it aside for a little bit, and then you reread it. And I tend to give it I read it through several times. For one, I read it through to see, does the plot have drive? I'm just focusing on the plot. Are there any big holes? Does the piping go together? The next thing is I'll read it through each character and say, am I following the journey of this character? Oh my gosh, how did she find that out? Why is she reacting to something she was never told? Things like that. You find out those things, or suddenly you lose sight of the character. They're suddenly kind of falling flat. And so you start to say, okay, what is the investment in their journey? You clarify each character and you make sure that they're consistent throughout and their voice is consistent throughout. And the final pass is a theme pass, where let's say your theme is you really can't do anything completely alone. You can't live your life alone and lead a productive life. And then you'll be going along and suddenly another scene says, oh, you should bootstrap yourself up. And well, that's a valid thing to say, stand on your own 2 feet, but if it's in the same movie, you're suddenly jarred. So the ideal, you can't do it every time, but the ideal is to advance, in each scene, you advance plot and character and theme. Each scene should advance those 3 things. And if a particular scene seems to be falling flat, usually one of those things has been left out. And so I read for those 3 things. And when that feels pretty good, and I've put it aside, then what we try and have is like a reading, where we sit around the table and you read it, and then you hear things that you hadn't heard before. So basically, it's that you start testing the waters with it, and at first it's difficult because you think you've finished, but if you have a little bit of experience, then the 5th draft is far much more fun than the first draft. Because you start to discover things, you start to develop resonances and connective tissue, and you've done the plumbing. The real hard work is done, or let's say the technical work. And so that's where the fun work starts, where you can really hone moments that you hadn't seen in the beginning. And so I think, for me, it's never done until final post-edit. Because you're still finding things and seeing things. So and the actors are discovering things, and you discover things in the editing process. So done is a very tricky word.
Well, also there's another factor is you have to make sure with the script that the main character is driving it. So in other words, you have to be very careful that the supporting characters aren't the main character, that the main character isn't passive. Very important. And also there's always a question of am I writing this script to sell it, or am I writing this script to make it? Those are 2 totally different objectives. And there's also a reading draft. So in other words, with some scripts I've written, I'll write them where they're entertaining reads. So in other words, the description is as entertaining as the dialogue, because someone's going to be sitting and reading it and you want them to be entertained and delighted and ideally buy the script. But there's other drafts that you're writing to shoot. Like for instance with Space Command, I know I'm going to be shooting it, that Elaine and I are going to be directing it, and that we're producing it. So then it's about, well, okay, how are we going to build this? How are we going to design this? Who am I hiring to do this role? So I'm writing it for one of the things I do is, whenever I write a script, I cast it in my mind. If it's certain actors I know I'm going to be hiring, I'll cast them. Or sometimes it'll be actors who are just very distinctive in my head, or people from my life who are very distinctive in my head. And then I'll print out little photos of them, and I'll put them in a strip, and I'll put them on the computer in front of me, so that when I'm writing, I can look at that person's face and I can hear them in my head. And that makes it come alive. But often when I'm writing nowadays, see, right now in my life I have zero interest in development. I'm not writing scripts to be put into development and never made. I'm not writing scripts. I'm here to make stuff. So that's why I did Space Command the way I've done it, and gone directly to my audience. So for me, it's very much okay. We're going to be shooting this. So how do we make the costumes? How do we build the sets? What's going to make these look interesting? This is where my art background comes in very handy, because I love working with visual designers and all of that. But like one of the things a challenge we have right now is for the second film, we've shot 30 minutes of it. We have the rest of it to shoot, and that takes place on an alien spaceship, a sleeper ship. 300 people have been abducted by an alien creature and put in hibernation. So it's like, okay, well that's interesting, because first of all, how do we do it so it looks different from anything we've ever seen? How can we utilize perhaps what we have already? And how can we make it look very, very interesting? So we recently put some of our sets in storage, so we're not paying the overhead on a sound stage, because we had our own physical studio for several years. And so I saw we have a cave set. And in the first Space Command film, the first 2-hour story, that cave set was used for a mining operation on Ceres, which is a planetoid in the asteroid belt. It was used for Mars colony, and it was used, I guess that's that. And then in the second film, we used it for ice caverns on Mercury. It's ice, because there's actually a crater on Mercury it's so deep that there's ice at the bottom of it. This is real. This is a true scientific fact. The sun never melts the ice. And so I posited having a city made of ice. Mercury has a lot of iron on it, so so we have this religious commune that mines the iron and ships it to the outer planets. And so they're there, and they have a city in the ice. So we used our cave set for the ice cavern. So I thought, well, we could take that cave set, turn it sideways, paint it black, run LED lights along it, put oblong amber pieces of lucite in it, have that be the sleeper cells, do forced perspective to make it look like there's 300 of them, and bang, we've got an alien spaceship. So now we're starting to think about how to design that.
But in terms of like the writing, and what he said, what was important in terms of the hero, that it has to be the hero's journey.
Yes.
Because people make a lot of mistake with their leads. They try and make them too shiny bright, and so they're boring, and all we want to see is the villain, right? We've all seen those movies. And you start giving too many of the fun lines to your subsidiary characters.
Right.
And you don't really think through, one, the power of the lead, and really say, okay, what if he were actually human and not all polished and perfect? Mm-hmm. Because we all secretly hate those people, right? and so, what really is the struggle? There's the external stuff, but you also have to give them the internal stuff. What are the insecurities? What are the demons? All these things. And are we really is that journey core where we'll really get on board with this guy? And do we really like this man and have his journey? So, I fell afoul of like giving my little side characters too much fun, like with the one that the script doctor gave me all these notes. There was one little character where I gave him so much fun stuff, and it kept slipping more and more over to the hero, more and more, until finally when my agent read it, he said, I really like it, but what's this character doing in here? I said, oh, nothing anymore. Mm. And so my favorite character was plucked out, right, because he didn't really belong, because it wasn't about him, it wasn't about his journey, it was about the struggle of the two leads in this particular piece. So some of it is to really say, what am I trying to say, and why have I selected this character to take the journey with, and what will I love about him? Right. One of my favorite films, which many people haven't seen because I'm older, is a thing called Marty. And the hero was an ugly butcher, like the writer. The writer saw himself as ugly, from New York. Petty-Chayefsky. Oh. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't, but that's how he perceived himself. And so what is the heroic journey of this character? The heroic journey of this character is simply, in the end, to stand against peers and family, to go on a quest for love, because he just wants someone to love him. Mm-hmm. And people are mom doesn't want to be left alone, and the friends don't want to be, feel like losers because their friend is married. There's well-meaning people, but in the end, they were like standing in opposition to him finding someone that he really loved.
Right.
And we can see that it took immense courage to stand against your peers and to stand against your family. So it was small, but it's huge, it's core. And so I found that an immensely touching piece, that this man who was past marriageable age fought to find something that he really, really wanted. And but he was full of flaws. He was afraid. He was easily swayed. He was easily embarrassed. But he was a sweet and honorable man, and he found love. And I found that an extremely heroic piece of writing. So,
because we have our own studio now, the final draft of the script is actually the final cut of the film. So we basically will write something, bring together our actors, shoot it, and then refine it in the cut. And so we love the fact that that allows us to refine the story, refine the script, refine what we had in mind. And often there'll be discoveries along the way. So we love the entire part of the process. And a big part of it is just when you meet brilliant, wonderful people, collect them, absorb them, have them become part of your team. That's what I've done with actors. That's what I've done with our editor, who's terrific. We just find incredibly talented people, and it's not about, as Elaine said earlier, you can't be a one-man band. If you wanted to be the end-all and the be-all, be a novelist, because they can sit in their room, they can write, they can be these pale, sad creatures. But if you're in film and TV, it takes hundreds of people, and then you need to really be a leader, have a vision, be kind to your people, be supportive of them. If you're a monster, if you're a nightmare, life's too short. You want to treat people well.
Your actors create a world, your DP creates a world,
yes.
Your set designer creates a world.
Right, but one thing I want to mention is our job as directors. See, Elaine is a better director than I am, so she's an actor's director, and so we're very strong together as directors. We don't disagree on the set because we have the same vision, but our job is to make a safe place for our actors so they can be vulnerable, they can be in the moment. Our job is to give them the room to do what they need to do, which is find honesty and authenticity. And so we see very much eye to eye on that.
Yeah, they have a very hard job because they have to, when you're writing, you have to say, oh, this woman was betrayed, and you have to live through that betrayal once. But you expect your performer to do it over and over and over and really feel it and really be in the moment. And that's really, really hard. You have to be like an Olympian. You have to be trained, have your emotions trained like an Olympic runner, that you can keep summoning that over and over. It's terrible to have an actor sobbing and say, hold for sound, hold for sound. I mean, that's a terrible thing, but a really well-trained actor can do that, can pull it out over.
Well, that's why actors have to be in class, they have to be working on their craft, they have to be able to turn it on like that, to be able to do it over and over and over. So, yeah.
You had said something earlier about when you did the Space Command auditions and you really saw people own the character. What is that when you see, maybe you don't see it at first in that same actor for that character, and then there's a switch. What is that owning? How do you tell?
Well, the owning of the character is that they seem to be profoundly and deeply inside the character. And for actors, they know about the thing about where either you're looking outside at yourself and saying, this character's supposed to be angry. I think I'll clench my fists and I'll tighten my mouth and I'll be angry. And that always comes across as phony. But when somebody owns it, it doesn't matter what they're doing with their body or their face. Inside, they're very angry. And one take it may come out loud, one quietly, but the camera really sees your eyes, sees it in your eyes.
Well, they're in the moment, they're feeling it.
They're actually feeling it completely in the moment, and that's when you say they're owning it, because what they're doing with, their hands will naturally tense, but it doesn't mean they'll be doing this kind of thing. It means that you will, when they feel it, you feel it. When they don't feel it, you don't feel it, at least not in the same way. And I've had, I've tested that out with actors and classes. When were they feeling it? And the class will all say, at this time they were feeling it. I'll go to the actor and say, when were you feeling it? It was always the same. The camera sees when it's real for you, and that's owning the character. And you often bring, a really fine actor brings a tremendous amount of their own background and experience to it. So they not just own it, the moment, but they own it in complex ways. There's sense memories and fears, and if they're supposed to be betrayed, they remember when they were two, somebody mocking them and not being able to stop the tears. And all of that actually comes across in the moment on screen.
Can we go back to the first screenplay ever sold? And how did you do it? What was the process?
Well, it's interesting because people talk to me about how do you break into Hollywood, and I always say I'm like a burglar working in a neighborhood where I have to break in and break in and break in. It's a continual process, and the first script I sold, interestingly enough, was again, this speaks toward gravitating toward your heroes. When I was an undergraduate at UCLA, I was an art student, and one of my great heroes was going to be teaching an adult education class at UCLA. His name was Theodore Sturgeon. He was a writer from the original Star Trek. He did 2 great episodes of Star Trek, Shore Leave and Amok Time, and he also had written novels and short stories, and I'd grown up reading him and idolizing him. He was a brilliant writer. And so, as an undergraduate, I was forbidden to take adult education classes. And I thought, well, screw that. I'm not going to miss this opportunity. So I took the class, and Ted Sturgeon became one of my great friends and mentors. I was 19 years old, and his teaching assistant was a young man named Michael Reeves. And Michael Reeves was selling short stories and novels, and he was just breaking in, and he was writing animation for television. And we became friends, and at one point he was writing a show called Space Stars for NBC. It had Space Ghost in it. And he was writing all of them. And he said, "You want to write one of these with me?" And I said, "Sure." And so we wrote that together, and then Smurfs was just starting up. And so we wrote an episode of Smurfs together, and then it was very clear I could write those on my own. And so I started writing for animation. So Smurfs and Super Friends and He-Man and Real Ghostbusters, on and on, tons of shows. And I became the god of animation. Now, I'd never wanted particularly to be an animation writer, but that was my way in. And so I was writing for CBS and NBC and ABC, and I learned how to write on deadline, how to write to a specific page count, how to write character voice that was in tune with what the voice of the show was and the voice of the characters, how to structure stories, all the things I would need to write live action TV shows and movies. I was learning my craft in animation. And meantime, during that period, I was writing the Twilight Zone companion, so I was learning that side of things too. So then I could earn $100,000 in just a few months writing for animation. So I decided that I would then write a spec live-action script as a showpiece to get into live action. So I told all of my employers that I was going to take a break to write my live-action samples feature. And they said, fine. And then as soon as that date came, they started calling me with offers of work. And I had to turn down $200,000 worth of work in 2 days. And that ruins your writing day. And so I then went to UCLA to write the library. And this is before cell phones, so I could write and no one would bother me. And at the end of the day, I would call in for my messages. But I finished that screenplay. It sold. It was a live-action script. It then that was used as a writing sample that got me a pilot deal at NBC, and I wrote that pilot, and that pilot got shot. And then from then on, I was working in live action, so that led to all the shows I did on staff, Friday the 13th, the series, and Sliders, and on and on and on. And so the moral of that story is you have to stand for yourself. If you say you're committed to doing something, committed to a certain dream, don't let people deflect you from that dream. Because I could easily have taken that animation work and I could be talking now and still be in animation. I could be writing whatever the current animation shows are and feeling very like I never had my dream. I never got to do what I wanted to do. Instead, because I was willing to turn down that money and stand up for myself and put in the work, I now have my own studio and I'm shooting what I'm here to be shooting. This is my dream project, and I'm very grateful to have that opportunity. But that's been my journey.
Well, I just started out in theater. I started out making stuff because I came from acting. I came out of acting. I got seduced by the highs you have as an actor, but it really wasn't for me. I was much more comfortable behind the camera. So I got flattered. I got a lot of flattering comments in terms of my skills in theater, but I really preferred the writing side. So I started just writing reviews and putting those things on. And
theatrical reviews, stage
New York,
plays.
yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so I just started with making, but also because as an actor, I was brought up in a very political environment, and you couldn't really control the material, and message was extremely important to me. Whereas when I started doing reviews, I could put the message out, and this was a while back, and bad things were happening. So I did that, and then when we got together, he seduced me into television.
Yes.
And so we started co-writing.
Well, TV's great.
TV is great, and I started like doing little things like just giving him notes, and that sort of grew.
It led to collaboration where we were writing scripts together. And so sometimes we work individually and sometimes we work together. It depends on the project.
So I started giving like notes, but it would always be like the character stuff, or what's the wrenching stuff, and because he's always very good with the action drive and that kind of thing. Although not everybody knows that I do some of the real kick-ass action scenes.
You really can't tell. Reading a script of ours, you really can't tell whose line is this, whose scene is this. We just kind of trade off depending, and so ultimately it's both of ours. But it's very funny because there was a scene between our hero and his father who's very condemning. And it's his father's in the military. They're both in the military, and there's this button line where there's this very tough line, and one of our friends who's in the Air Force really loved that line, and it's this ballsy macho line, and it's Elaine. Elaine wrote that line, so it's great, really fun, and but collaboration is terrific when someone's on your wavelength, and so I really love working with Elaine. But for instance, we have a couple of feature projects now where Elaine's the writer-director and we're both producing. So we have 2 projects in England right now that we're working on. So so it just depends on what we're doing on a given day. But also we're very good. Both of us are very, very good at multitasking. So for instance, in a given week, like just for an example. And this is something I learned in TV, to multitask, because when you're on staff, you're juggling a lot of balls, and sometimes you'll be working on multiple TV shows simultaneously, which I've done many times. So on a given week, we're working on Space Command 1, which we're in post on and doing VFX and editing and all sorts of stuff, sound design. We're on Space Command 2, editing what we've shot, but also getting ready to shoot the rest of it. Elaine just gave me notes on Space Command 3, so I'm going to be rewriting that script. I'm also finishing the new edition of the Twilight Zone Companion, so I'm writing that and also meeting with my publisher on the photographs and all that. And then I might be making notes on some of the other things I'm writing as well. And Elaine's working on her feature projects too. So, and also that's beside the meetings we're having with, like I had lunch yesterday with a producer. We're scheduling meetings in England. It just continues.
I mean, the one thing that's fun is that it is a world market.
Yes.
And so when you're saying, oh, there's no place for it here, say, well, how about France? How about England?
Yes.
It's truly a world market, and you want to reach out as broadly as you can, because again, one thing that was really fun about the Kickstarter campaign was to say, oh, goody, there's geeks all over the universe, you can,
yes.
So you say that there are people of like mind in all cultures, across the world when you're talking about stuff that's core. And so that's one of the really fun things about being a storyteller and running the table, because we get storytellers from all over the world who are telling core stories, but from an entirely fresh and different perspective. And so they come to the table because Hollywood has the name, Wonderful stories are being shot and told all over, but Hollywood has the name, and so we have the honor of drawing people from everywhere, and they talk about their stories, and they're fascinating, and so it's really a grand fun, and we often help with the immigration issues.
I mean, we'll hire actors and so forth, and that helps them stay here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The biggest success you feel you've both had so far, and where were you in your life when this happened?
Okay, what would you say?
Oh, go ahead. I don't know.
Well, for me, the biggest success I've ever had was meeting you. It's like, that made everything, everything that good that's come in my life has been thanks to that. So that's the high point, I've been very, very lucky because I met Elaine when I think I just turned 20. And so that was perfection. That was great because, again, when she met me, I was just a little college student. There was no telling if I would accomplish anything. And she had faith in me. So when I met her, I already knew she was wonderful. But, she was taking a big risk in me. And it worked out. But I've been very lucky because, think of all the people who, as kids, they want to be writers or directors or producers. They watch TV shows and they say, God, I'd like to be part of that world. I want to be on the other side of that glass of the TV screen. And I got to do that. I got to be that. My heroes were Rod Serling and Ray Bradbury because they were doing TV and books and movies. And I got to do all of that. And so I'm very, very lucky. But Elaine had faith in me. And I was, it's funny because I was going to say I was unformed. When she met me, I wasn't able to do any of the things I can do now. But she had already directed off Broadway. She had already been an actress. She had adventures, and so she had already proven her value.
I think for both of us, our biggest success is whatever we're involved in at the moment. We're not most looking back. We're sort of drunk on the moment, the enthusiasm of the moment. Yes. And in a way, it's kind of sad to say, well, that was the big time.
No.
I think it's the ongoing journey. You have to sort of the success is the ongoing journey, and you have to be a little bit crazy, you know, with each new thing and say, this is going to be amazing.
Right.
And so I don't think it's like one thing. It's
well, we don't rest on our laurels.
Yeah.
I mean, right now is the exciting time. I mean, to have my own studio, to walk into a building filled with spaceship sets. I mean, I mentioned that when I was 10, I went to the Star Trek set, and when I step onto that stage with our spaceship sets, it's the exact same feeling. It's that same thrill. I'm 10 years old again. And to be able to create something, it's like every day is like Christmas. It's just basically, my God, wonderful actors, wonderful people to work with, and to be able to write and direct and produce with Elaine is such a thrill, because she brings the meaning. She makes sure that what I'm doing is meaningful and is working. And when we're done with this, we'll go back with our editor, and we'll sit down with our editor and continue working. And that's just thrilling. And so we're just very lucky to be where we are and doing what we do.
So what would you say to someone that might be listening to this that feels that maybe they hit their peak however many years ago, and they feel that there's no way up for them for whatever reason?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Oh, I would say that has nothing to do with their craft. I think that has to do with feeling stuck in life. And take a walk around the block, talk to people, volunteer. That, you know, bring yourself back to your work. Something has happened. There's been a disconnect. And that I doubt very much of it has to do with their craft. It has to do with they've lost something inside, which can easily be regained if you don't tell yourself a story. You know, it's the stories that destroy us. And to just say, get re-enthused about your life. And it's not in the past. All those years, even the years of misery, there's, you know, we were talking to a large group of writers in a seminar, and two writers in the far front corner of this large room, they raised their hand and said, well, we're from Denmark, and we'd love to work here, but we're very different, we have a different culture. You know, we really feel we have nothing to say because we feel like such outsiders. And I said, well, why don't you just turn around and look at everybody else in the audience? And they did. And I said, okay, everybody else in the audience, who here feels like an outsider? And every hand in the room went up. And I said, I think you've got something to write about. And what's important is a lot of people don't realize that. It's like, oh, I feel so alone. And to say, well, everyone tends to feel secretly very alone. And so you understand that even in your loneliness, you're not alone. So have the courage and share it. And that makes you and everybody else feel less so. And so I think those feelings, to say, I'm feeling it, but I know it's bogus, and I will push through.
And what I would also say in that regard is, every day that you wake up is another beginning. And the past, in a way, is an illusion. It's sort of like, it's gone. You can't reclaim it. So all you can do is say, what do I want to do with this day? What do I want to do this moment? And you can be an entirely reborn person. But look for people who are positive. Look for people who have a good life energy. Look for people who allow you your dream. And if you don't find them where you are, come here. Come to where, you know, where your dreams can be made possible. And don't be stopped. You know, but don't be ever stopped. Find the way to make it happen.
In one of my scripts that I'm in the middle of polishing, there's a place of second chances, you know, and somebody says, they don't believe that there's a place where you can get second chances. And they say, well, because if somebody found out that there's a place of second chances, then this place would be flooded. And the fellow he's talking to, he said, laughs and says, no, you're thinking of the town down the way of damn good excuses.
Yes.
And and I think that when sometimes people feel defeated, part of them is looking for the good excuse and not really for the second chance, because that we can make endlessly.
Yeah, but one thing I'll say just in conclusion in that regard, I would urge anyone who has a dream to pursue it and to not be deterred and to take a chance. You know, and to really go for it. And one day I came home, and there was a message on my answering machine, and it was Ray Bradbury. And he'd come across something I'd written, and he loved it, and he invited me to his house. And that was, of course, a thrill of a lifetime. And I went to his house, and we hit it off, and we became great friends. And the thing that amazed me about Ray was that I knew him in his 80s and into his 90s. He died at 91. And through that whole time, I met him after he'd had a stroke, and his schedule as a writer had been to get up 5 days a week, write for 3 hours, then have lunch, take a nap, do his business, his writing, you know, the business of his career in the afternoon, and then evenings and weekends for his family. And he did that for 70 years. And when I knew him, he'd had a stroke, and his mind was fine, but he couldn't type anymore, and his handwriting was even very difficult. So what he would do to continue writing was he would wake up in the morning holding the words in his head. He would then call his daughter in Arizona and dictate the words to her. She would type them and then fax them to him, and he would make hand corrections on the typescript. That was how he wrote. And he was writing 2 new books a year through his 80s into his 90s, and he was made of iron. And so this is the kind of person that I wanted to be my inspiration and my mentor, because I saw how determined he was. Nothing was going to stop him. And that was wonderful to see, and certainly something I want to emulate. So I would urge everyone to take that to heart and not be deterred.